The pirate's trap would have worked perfectly, pulling us right out of FTL space and would have left us adrift right in their territory. We would have been at their mercy if it wasn't for a few humans in the engineering, many of them screaming things we didn't understand, trying to rewire different systems that were not meant to be wired together, but they were somehow able to get our FTL engines restored before we completely dropped out of FTL space. When this happened, we jumped clean of pirate territory, but then we had another issue. Our engines were completely and totally cooked. We still had our maneuvering thrusters, which was, of course, a godsend. However, what came to be next was something none of us were looking forward to. You see, in space, many of us knew that if we had to resort to escape pods, we would be either scattered across a world that we didn't know anything about, left in enemy territory to simply be shot up or taken as captors, or worse, slaves. Or we would end up simply drifting in stasis until something bigger and heavier crashed into us, causing us all to go kersplat or simply explode. And none of us wanted that. To our sheer shock, we were close enough to a planet. In fact, we drifted so that its orbit would end up right next to us. This was another thing that the humans in engineering had figured out. They were able to get just enough burst on all of our engines to get us within striking range of it. And with that, we were able to bring our shuttles down. The only problem is that the shuttles were damaged as well. The pirates' attack had been unbelievably effective. Once our shuttles were launched, the ship itself would plummet into the planet, and there was no surviving. The shuttles themselves were immediately launched and head down to the planet, many of our pilots trying desperately to stay close to each other, trying to keep everyone together as best as possible, as there is strength in numbers. We didn't know anything about this planet as most of the systems were offline. We didn't know where we were, what sector, and then before we knew it, we're gliding in, hoping that the dense foliage wouldn't tear our shuttles to pieces as we made planetfall. Thankfully, 80% of us made it down without a problem, but 3 of our shuttles didn't quite make it. One of them got stuck up into a tree and eventually broke the branches as it plummeted down. Thankfully for the crew, this is after they got out. The other 2 just didn't make it to the ground. One burned up on re-entry, and the other, as it tried to glide in, was caught up by the trees, tumbled, and then crashed into a pile of rocks. We all said our own different prayers for them, wished them well on their next adventure, and then got to work. Although most of us were completely dumbfounded at what we found. Now we were there with shuttles that barely had any power, barely had any resources at all, and here we are on an inhospitable planet right next to a water source, which is right where you don't want to be. We all knew this, as survival training was a requirement in the academy before anyone goes into space, yet most people sleep through this class. It's not a pass or fail class, it's just one you have to go through, and many of us were worried that we would lose out our survival game. This would mean that there was not going to be a referee showing up telling us whether we passed or failed or anything like that, but it would mean that our demise was imminent. As many of the species walked out, 7 in total, we all looked and tried to establish what was going on. Many of them were panicking. Most of this was too high gravity for their bodies, and they immediately started slumping down, not able to withstand the high gravity. Others were trying to get to take flight, but found out that the air was a bit too thin for them to do so. Others were looking around for any type of water source besides this one area, as they were an aquatic species and would require copious amounts of fluids to stay alive. This was all except for the humans. The humans seemed remarkably calm while everyone else was freaking out. The humans began dividing up tasks among everyone, and we didn't understand what was going on. Couldn't we just set the retrieval beacons? Of course not. The pirates had been very good. Somehow the retrieval beacons were either blocked or just were not functional. We didn't know how, but somehow the engines were completely cooked on the shuttles as well. We were grateful we could get to the ground at all, actually. The humans kept telling everyone that they couldn't stay here. They started yelling at a few insectoid species to stop trying to build a nest right next to a water source because this is where predators like to hunt. This is what made everyone pause. How would the humans know this? Most people didn't know much about humans as they had just recently joined the galactic community at large, maybe a month and a half ago. Having this many on a vessel was actually surprising. We were starting to wonder if the pirates had targeted this ship specifically for the human crews, as it seems that human slaves were of high priority. We didn't understand why, as they were simply just fleshy balls of something. Simple endoskeleton, only two upper appendages and two lower appendages. They weren't anything special. Their binocular vision might help them hunt a little bit, and they are definitely strong, but we didn't understand what would make these humans so special. As we begin to move around, the humans started demanding that we stay with the shuttles and start to ration everything. They would try and see if they could find more resources for us. Most of the other species, not equated to the gravity or the air, simply obeyed these orders and didn't question what humans were going to do. Several of the humans got in the center of where the shuttles were and began to build something. A small stone ring. Well, not so small, approximately 2 meters across. And then built it up a little higher. Then started filling it with some sort of dead foliage. We didn't understand what was going on until one of them produced a small little metal device, and with a flick of its digits, produced flame. We realized what they were doing, building a fire. We had heard of this, but it had been so long since many of our species required a fire. However, for aquatic species, they feared this, along with the insectoid species, feared it most of all. To an insectoid species, fire was truly horrifying, because if it burned your wings, you were done forever. Your own species would rip you apart and use you for food. This worried them very much. Yet, they didn't worry as much as the fire itself was far enough away from the shuttles, yet the humans always motioned for everyone to come over and enjoy it. It seemed as though it was mostly just humans that did enjoy it. A few others, like the Rekna and the Shani, enjoyed being around the fire a little bit more. The Shawnee just wanted to put some heat on their feathers. They thought maybe the warm air would help them to take flight easier, but to no avail. As it turns out, they would have to get up much, much higher to catch enough air for their bodies to take flight. The humans even stated as much as they realized that the wings were not wide enough for air this thin, yet the humans didn't seem to have any problems breathing it. Before anyone even realized what was going on, they heard something off in the distance. They waited and realized a couple humans had taken off that direction. Then the human showed up about 20 minutes later, carrying some large carcass situated on a pole as they seemed to pridefully carry this dead creature. This dead creature was almost 3 meters long in and of itself, seemed to be a large reptile, and they had already seemed to have removed its intestines. With that, they dropped it next to the fire and began prepping. A whole bunch of other humans showed up with a whole bunch of different utensils so they could cook this creature. They insisted that it'll be safe as soon as we cook it. It'll kill off all the bacteria, so it'll be good. It's going to be safe. And it's going to be real tasty, too. This made many of the species wary of humans, as they knew they were omnivores. But were omnivores really this interested in simple proteins? Couldn't omnivores just chow on the grass? The Zani did, although they're only herbivores. They are not carnivores at all. Though they did tend to sniff the air, seemingly enjoying the smell of this creature as it roasted over an open fire. We didn't believe that humans could do this. We only had 14 humans with us. And yet they had somehow managed to not only build a fire, but procure some food. And with that, they grabbed a few containers and slowly walked towards the water, asking the amphibious species if they could retrieve some water for us. But keep it inside the containers. Don't drink it yet. They wanted to make sure it was safe. We kept looking for any type of chemical kits so we could purify the water, and the humans laughed. They laughed hysterically at what we were saying. We didn't understand, and they simply took these containers and placed them over the fire and waited several minutes until it began to rumble and boil at 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees centigrade. We were amazed at this. This is what they were going to do? They were going to drink it while it was hot? That hot? But no, they put it off to the side and told everyone to wait until it cooled. Once it was cool, it was safe to drink, as they killed off all the parasites. Many of the creatures that we had were amazed at this. Every different species had heard about things like this, but they had never seen it put into practice. As we realized that the humans had some interesting tricks up their sleeves, we began to listen. It wasn't long until the humans started to build something. They first laid it out on the ground, and then they began to build. Many of the other species wanted to help out with them, but kept getting confused as they were like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And the humans started to get agitated, more than a little agitated, as they would get actually mean and scream and yell, just go over there and do something else. Just let us do this. With that, many species just left them alone. Although, when asked for materials, many were interested in picking them up because they knew by the size of this complex, it was not just for humans. The humans somehow made themselves a shelter out of the material of the forest we were next to. Though we were able to move a few of the shuttles, just barely with the maneuvering thrusters, and get them lined up so that we could have some sort of perimeter, most of what we had was just the doors, just the shuttles themselves, and eventually the power would run out. Humans seemed to understand this wholeheartedly by the time we even landed and knew exactly what to do. They began to build walls that were integrated with different, what they call lean-tos. These lean-tos had a bed and a overhead shelter attached to them. We were amazed at this. How would they know how to do this? Eventually, I even walked up to one. I asked, Human Roy, how do humans know how to do this? You're not having a discussion. There is no council chamber. There is no meeting. How do you know to instinctively do this? What, survive? Well, everyone survives, yes, but you've already not only secured food and water, but you have also maintained a dwelling. You have created a dwelling out of nothing but what is here on this planet. You have not even used much more than a few small pieces of the shuttles. How do you know how to do this? Oh, this here, as he places his hands on the small wall, this here is a common practice where we come from. Truly? A common practice? With that, a crowd had begun to arise to listen to the conversation. Oh, yeah, we go out and camp all the time. It's called survival camping. Survival camping? It's also known as subsistence camping and stuff like that. How do I put this? We would like to push ourselves and see what we could do without the wonderful technology that we have. It keeps us level, brings us back to our roots, and make sure we don't forget who we are and where we come from. With that, the humans seemed to realize that a whole bunch of the crews were around him, watching and listening. Well, tell you what, if you're all interested, don't try to tell us how to do it, and we'll show you and we'll teach you. With that, there was no more discussion. Day in and day out, it was always the same, building more and more of these structures, integrating them all together so that they were intermixed, making sure that everyone had their own section, and yet it was set up in a way that protected everyone. It was even more protected than the shuttles at one point, at least for a while. It wasn't long until one of our avian species, who had finally been able to get himself off the ground, came back and told everyone that there was a very large predator. So large, in fact, that our walls were not going to be able to stop it. So what did the humans do? Did they panic? Did they run? Did they hide? No. They simply reinforced the walls and integrated all the walls to create a dome, a massive dome that covered each of them. Whatever this creature was would have to crawl its way through the dome to actually get to the personnel inside. They even made a sturdy gate on the front. This amazed everyone, but almost as much as what they did next. They cut a hole in the side. They cut a hole in the side and created a ramp that went up into the local fauna, the large trees as they called them. And once they finally began to reach up to one of the trees, reaching well over 20 meters high, way higher than any possible ground based predator could reach them, they began to build platforms to the trees, and then they made bridges from platform to platform. And on said platform, they began to build small dwellings. This was insane. The humans had now basically built themselves a city. Not only that, but they had built themselves a separate area in the trees themselves. This allowed many of the avian species a place to survive, a place to take off and land to without having to crawl their way on top of one of the shuttles in the hope that they would be able to get enough air under their wings that they could take flight and not simply smash on the ground and say, ow. And now the humans also joined them. The humans enjoyed being up in the trees much more than they enjoyed being down on the ground. Many people wondered why, and the humans said, we started in the trees. It's a good thing we stayed here. As we were stuck on that planet for over an entire solar cycle, what the humans refer to as years. By their own standard, it was only about a half a year. But by galactic cycles, it was a year point two. Within that time, the humans had created basically their own colony, to the point that a few of the insectoid species wanted to link up their own hives to the human built colony. This was to help everyone out, to share resources. And then, before we knew it, we finally saw the recovery teams coming down. They had finally found us. What they saw when they landed shocked them all. They believed that they would be coming down to retrieve nothing but bodies, retrieve the shuttles, as they found what was left of the ship plastered on the side of a mountain. They believed that they would not find anything but the remnants of the crew, and they would have to spend the next week or 2 weeks simply pulling up bodies, pulling up all their effects, and trying to figure out whose was what. But instead, all they needed to do was give the shuttles a jump start so that we could get off this rock and leave behind the massive colony that the humans had made. From then on, this story was shared throughout the Academy, along with the pictures and video. The colony, which was still in use to this day, has become known as the template on how to survive on an alien world. It didn't matter what species it was, because now, even though it used to be considered a joke, as space has a million ways to kill you, and almost none of them are on the planet. But once you're on the planet, if you don't know what's there, your chances of survival are zero. But now, thanks to what the humans have shown everyone, well, the survival is pretty much guaranteed, and that class is no longer a joke. The forgotten ways are no longer forgotten.